She had exactly 3 minutes to decide whether to keep the secret that was already changing her body or hand it to the one man who would use it to destroy her. If you've ever loved someone who was never really yours to begin with, stay with me. This story is going to cut deep. Before we go further, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Like this video so more people find us. Because what happens next, you do not want to find out from someone else. The ultrasound photo was smaller than Amara's palm. She had folded it twice on the way home from the clinic, tucking it inside her coat pocket like something contraband, like something that could get her killed if the wrong person saw it first, which, as it turned out, was not an entirely unreasonable fear. She just hadn't understood that yet. It was a Tuesday, cold the way only Chicago in late November can be cold. Not just temperature, but weight. The kind of cold that sits on your shoulders and makes every breath feel like an argument you're losing. She pushed through the lobby of Dominic's building on Michigan Avenue with her head down and her jaw set, and her hands wrapped around the small folded square of paper in her pocket. The security team in the lobby nodded. They always nodded. They had been nodding at her for 7 months without ever once asking her name at the front desk, because Dominic had given specific instructions, and in his world specific instructions were the closest thing to law that existed. The elevator was mirrored on all 3 walls. She watched herself rise 42 floors and tried to read her own face the way she read damaged paintings, searching beneath the surface layer for what had been there before the damage. What she saw was a 31-year-old woman with dark circles and a secret that was currently 8 weeks and 4 days old and growing faster than her ability to pretend everything was fine. She had rehearsed what she was going to say during the cab ride over. She had rehearsed it in the shower at 5 in the morning when she couldn't sleep. She had rehearsed it so many times the words had started to lose their shape, the way any word does if you repeat it long enough. Pregnant, 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 until it sounds like something foreign, something borrowed from a language she was never supposed to speak. The penthouse door opened before she touched it. Marcus, Dominic's head of security, was already moving toward the elevator bank with his coat on and his phone against his ear, and he gave her a look she couldn't decode. Something between sympathy and warning, though she didn't know enough yet to understand which one was the message. "He's in the main room," Marcus said, and then he was past her, and then the elevator doors were closing behind him, and then she was alone in the entryway of a penthouse that had never once felt like home no matter how many nights she had spent in it. She heard the television before she reached the main room. She heard it the way you hear a sound that you recognize but your brain refuses to process immediately, the way a car door slamming outside your window at 3 in the morning takes a full second to register as something that woke you up. A news anchor's voice, formal and excited in the particular way that announces something historic rather than something merely important. Then Dominic's voice, lower, harder, the voice he used when he was speaking to someone he was managing rather than someone he trusted. She stepped into the room. Every screen in the penthouse was on. Dominic had 4, a wall-mounted television, 2 monitors on the desk built into the north wall, and a tablet propped on the kitchen island. And every single one of them was showing the same thing, the same photograph. A man she recognized and a woman she did not, standing together at what appeared to be a press event, and the chyron running beneath them in bold white letters that she read twice because the first time didn't fully arrive. Dominic Kwan and Vivian Han. Engagement confirmed. Historic alliance between Kwan Industrial Holdings and Han Dynasty Group. Ceremony scheduled for spring. She did not scream. She had never been a woman who screamed. What she did was stand completely still in the doorway of that penthouse for approximately 11 seconds. She would count them later, replaying the moment the way you replay a car accident in slow motion to understand the physics of the impact, and feel the rehearsed speech she had been carrying for 3 days dissolve inside her chest like paper in water. Dominic was on the phone. He saw her the moment she appeared in the doorway. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not exactly, because guilt requires a person to believe they have done something wrong. And Dominic Kwan had a particular talent for constructing narratives in which he had never once been wrong. But something adjacent to guilt. Recognition. The specific recognition of a man who understands that 2 separate timelines, have just collapsed into a single moment he cannot control. He lowered the phone. Amara. She said nothing. She looked at the screens, she looked at the photograph of Dominic in a dark suit standing beside a woman who was elegant and cold and clearly accustomed to being photographed next to power. Then she looked back at him. I was going to tell you, he said, 3 words that had never once, in the entire history of human relationships, made anything better. When? She said. Her own voice surprised her. It was very quiet and very steady, and it did not sound like a woman who had been awake since 5 a.m. rehearsing a different conversation entirely. It sounded like a woman who was performing a very controlled surgery on herself in real time. Dominic set the phone on the desk. He crossed the room toward her and she took 1 step backward. Just one. Just enough. And something in that single step stopped him. He was a man accustomed to closing distances. He was not accustomed to distances that communicated clearly that closing them would be a mistake. It's not, he started. Don't, she said. Don't explain it to me like I'm a problem that needs managing. That's not what I'm doing. That's exactly what you're doing. She tilted her head toward the screens. How long? He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. The arrangement was made before we met, he said finally. Before any of this. It's political, it's structural. It has nothing to do with... Say it has nothing to do with us, she said, and I will walk out that door right now. He stopped. She watched him calculate. That was the thing about Dominic Kwan that she had understood from the very beginning and loved anyway, which said something unflattering about her own judgment. He calculated everything, every word, every gesture, every silence. She had told herself the calculation was a form of care. She understood now that it was simply control dressed in more attractive clothing. It has to do with everything, he said quietly. But not with you. Not with what I feel. What you feel? She repeated it carefully, the way you might repeat something in a foreign language to make sure you have the pronunciation right. You feel things, Dominic. You feel them and then you file them away and you make your decisions, and the feelings don't change the decisions, do they? Not once. Not ever. He had no answer for that. She gave him credit for not inventing one. She put her hand in her coat pocket. Her fingers found the folded ultrasound photograph and held it, and she stood there in his kitchen for a long moment with the television screen still running the same chyron, the same photograph, the same announcement of a future that had been planned without her, and without any concern for what her presence in his life might eventually require him to account for. She thought about what she had come here to say. She thought about the face she had imagined making when she said it, the careful mix of nervousness and hope she had been rehearsing in bathroom mirrors for 3 days. She thought about what she had believed this news would mean to a man like Dominic Kwan, and the specific variety of foolishness required to have believed it. Then she took her hand out of her pocket. Empty. Okay, she said. He frowned. Okay. Okay. She looked around the penthouse one final time, the way you look at a room you know you're leaving and will not return to. It was beautiful. The way everything Dominic owned was beautiful. Beautiful and impersonal and arranged for maximum effect. I hope you're happy, Dominic. I really do. She walked back to the entryway and she picked up her bag, which she had set down when she came in, and she opened the front door and she left. She did not slam it. She pulled it closed behind her with the same careful deliberateness she applied to everything, and the soft mechanical click of the latch felt, in that moment, like the most violent sound she had ever made. She took the elevator down alone. In the mirrored walls, she watched her own face and thought it looked like the face of a woman who had just survived something she hadn't seen coming, which was accurate, and also the face of a woman who was not finished surviving yet, which was also accurate. In the lobby, she walked past the security team without looking at any of them. She pushed through the revolving door, and the cold hit her immediately, that punishing November cold, and she stood on the sidewalk of Michigan Avenue for exactly 1 moment before she started walking. She walked 6 blocks without stopping. Then she ducked into a coffee shop that she had never been to before, and sat in the back corner and unfolded the ultrasound photograph on the small wooden table in front of her and stared at it for a long time. 8 weeks and 4 days, a shape that looked like nothing yet and everything already. She thought about what it would mean to tell him now. She ran the calculation, his calculation, the kind she had always hated and was now performing herself. And what came back was clean and cold and undeniable. If she told Dominic Kwan that she was carrying his child today, the morning his engagement to a Han Dynasty heiress had just been announced on every major news channel in the country, she would become a problem. Not a person. A problem. A complication in an arrangement that involved more money and more power and more carefully negotiated violence than she had ever allowed herself to fully understand during the months she had spent pretending his world was something she could safely orbit. She thought about what a man like Dominic did with problems. She picked up the photograph. She put it back in her pocket. Then she took out her phone and she called the only person in Chicago she trusted without qualification. Her friend and former colleague, Petra Walsh, who was nosy and blunt and had been telling Amara for 4 months that something about the situation with Dominic felt wrong in ways she couldn't fully articulate. And when Petra picked up, Amara said very quietly, "I need you to help me find an apartment. Not here. Somewhere else. I need to move by the end of the week." Petra was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "Are you safe?" "Right now," Amara said. "Yes." "Okay," Petra said. "I'll make some calls." Amara hung up. She sat in the corner of the coffee shop for another hour while Chicago moved past the window outside. Indifferent the way cities are indifferent, enormous and gray and continuing. She ordered nothing. She looked at her phone twice. She did not call Dominic. She did not answer when he called her. Once, then twice, then a third time, each call coming a few minutes after the last, the intervals growing shorter the way intervals do when a controlled man begins to lose control. She turned the phone face down on the table. When she finally left the coffee shop, she walked back to her own apartment. Her apartment, the one she had kept even after spending most of her nights at his, the one she had been quietly, instinctively maintaining as an exit that she had told herself she would never need. And she stood at the kitchen sink and she took the ultrasound photograph out of her pocket. She turned on the front burner of the stove. She held the photograph over the flame. It caught faster than she expected. The paper curled and browned and blackened, and the gray image of the small 8-week shape dissolved into smoke. And she held the photograph until the heat reached her fingers, and then she dropped the last corner into the sink and watched it finish burning, and then she ran the water and washed the ash away. She kept one corner, a small scorched triangle, gray-black, nothing visible on it anymore. She put it in the inside pocket of her coat, against her sternum, and she closed the flap over it. Then she began to pack. She moved with the kind of efficiency that only becomes available to a person when emotion has been set aside as a luxury they can no longer afford. 2 suitcases. Everything that was irreplaceable and nothing that was merely valuable. Her documents, passport, licenses, the folder of professional certificates she had spent 8 years accumulating went into the bag first. Her grandmother's bracelet. 3 books that she had read so many times their spines were broken. Her restoration tools, wrapped carefully in cloth, because they were how she made money, and money was now the most important thing in the world. She did not take the key to his penthouse from the hook by her front door. She left it exactly where it hung, which was a message she composed deliberately and without ambiguity. She called a car service she had never used before, not the one on Dominic's approved vendor list, not any service that could be cross-referenced against his accounts. And she was in the car and moving north out of Chicago before 7 o'clock that evening. She left her phone on the kitchen counter. Not smashed, not destroyed. Just left there, screen up, plugged into the wall charger, battery at 94%. Receiving his calls in an empty apartment. She understood enough about Dominic's world to know that a smashed phone could be traced, and a disappeared phone triggered certain responses, and a phone that simply sat in place and kept ringing said something entirely different. It said, "I know what you are, and I know enough to make sure you cannot find me." She was 2 hours north of Chicago before she allowed herself to cry. It was not a long cry. She didn't have room for a long cry. She pressed her forehead against the cold car window and let it happen for about 4 minutes, and then she straightened up, and she looked at the dark highway ahead, and she put her hand against her stomach, barely showing, barely anything yet, just a slight firmness that only she would recognize for what it was. And she made a decision. She was going to survive this. Both of them were. And she was going to do it without asking Dominic Kwan for a single thing, What Amara Bennett could not know, sitting in the back of that car with ash under her fingernails and a scorched triangle of paper against her heart, was that 300 miles away, a man who had never once in his adult life been surprised by anything was standing in his penthouse, staring at a phone that rang and rang, in an apartment he now understood she had already left. And what she could not know was that somewhere in that city, in a glass office 40 stories above Lakeshore Drive, a woman named Vivian Hahn was sitting across from her father and listening to him describe in precise and unemotional terms exactly what needed to happen to any complication that threatened the spring wedding. The word he used was eliminate. He meant it literally. And he already had a name. The town of Millhaven, Illinois did not appear on any tourist map and had no particular reason to. It had a grain elevator, a hardware store, a diner that closed at 2 in the afternoon, and a bakery called Rosen's that had been operating out of the same brick storefront on Caldwell Street since 1971. It had a population of approximately 4,000 people who mostly knew each other's business and had long since stopped being interested in anyone else's. It was, in other words, exactly the kind of place where a woman trying to disappear could become invisible inside of 2 weeks. Amara had been there for 5 months. She woke every morning at 4:15 because the ovens at Rosen's needed to be at temperature by 5, and she had discovered in those 5 months that the discipline of physical labor, real labor, flour on your arms and heat on your face, and the specific ache of standing for 8 hours on a concrete floor was the only thing that kept the other thoughts manageable. Not gone. Nothing made them gone, but manageable. The way a fever becomes manageable when you stop fighting it and simply let your body do the work of surviving it. She was 33 weeks now. The pregnancy showed in a way that could no longer be explained away or minimized. She moved differently. She breathed differently. She had learned to lean against the prep counter during the slow afternoon hours when her lower back announced itself with a persistence that felt almost personal, like her own body staging a small daily protest against the pace she was trying to maintain. Deb Rosen, who was 64 and had grown up in the building and had the handshake of someone who had been kneading dough since childhood, had stopped asking Amara to carry the 50-pound flour bags from the storage room 2 months ago without making any comment about it, which was the most tactful thing anyone had done for her in recent memory. She was living as Anna Marsh. The name had been Petra's idea, or rather Petra's cousin's idea, a paralegal in Evanston who had contacts Amara had chosen not to ask too many questions about, and who had produced a clean Illinois driver's license and a social security number, and a rental history thin enough to be recent but solid enough not to raise immediate questions. It had cost Amara $4,000 and a level of moral compromise she had decided to file under necessary rather than comfortable. Anna Marsh worked at a bakery. Anna Marsh was 31 weeks pregnant. She had adjusted the number when she moved to Mill Haven, a small buffer, a detail that would not match if someone was comparing records. And she had told Deb when asked that the father was not in the picture, which was the most accurate 2-sentence summary of a situation that would have taken considerably longer to explain fully. She had not spoken to anyone from her previous life since she left Chicago, not Petra, after the initial call. No one from the conservation firm where she had worked for 6 years. No one who knew her real name or her real face in a context that could be connected to anyone named Dominic Kwan. She followed the news the way you follow weather in a region you no longer live in, with a kind of detached vigilance, monitoring for developments that might require action without allowing herself to be emotionally involved in the forecast. She knew from a used laptop purchased with cash and a coffee shop Wi-Fi signal in the next town over that Dominic's engagement to Vivian Hahn had not been followed immediately by a wedding announcement. She knew that 2 of Dominic's peripheral business interests had been restructured in ways that suggested internal pressure. She knew that his name had appeared 3 times in 6 weeks in the financial press, always in connection with language like realignment and strategic review, which in the particular dialect of organized wealth meant that something was unstable. She did not read these articles twice. She closed them and cleared the browser history and went back to her flour and her 4:15 mornings and her manageable thoughts. What she had not accounted for, could not have accounted for, because the failure was biological rather than strategic, was a Thursday in her 31st week when the baby pressed against something internal with a sudden sharp insistence that dropped Amara to one knee behind the prep counter at 6:40 in the morning, and Deb found her there, and called the paramedics before Amara could say the 3 words she most needed to say, which were, "Please don't document." The paramedics documented. They were required to. A woman on her knees, advanced pregnancy, workplace incident, minimum reporting threshold triggered automatically. The report went into the county system under the name Anna Marsh, first name only in the initial dispatch record, flagged for follow-up with the attending physician. It was a small mistake. The smallest possible mistake. A first name in a paramedic's report in a county database in a town that did not appear on tourist maps. She would not know for another 3 weeks that it had been enough. Dominic found the thread on a Tuesday morning. His people had been running search algorithms against medical databases, employment records, utility accounts, and rental applications across a 4-state radius for 5 months, and the thread they found was not a confirmation. It was a proximity. A first name, a pregnancy flag, a county in northern Illinois, and a timestamp that aligned with a gap in a search pattern his team had been running on payroll filings. It was the kind of evidence that a prosecutor would have thrown out, and a man who had built his organization on reading incomplete information would have acted on immediately. He acted on it immediately. He did not send Marcus. He did not send anyone. He drove north himself, alone, in a car that was not registered to any of his companies because he had spent 5 months understanding the specific message that Amara's disappearance had sent him, and he was not going to answer it with a convoy of black vehicles and men in earpieces. He had made enough mistakes. He was not going to make the mistake of arriving like an invasion. He found Rosen's Bakery at 4:50 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, 12 minutes before closing. He sat in the car across the street for 11 minutes, and he watched the lights inside and he thought about what he was going to say, which was something he had been doing for 5 months and had still not resolved to his satisfaction, which was itself an experience so unfamiliar that it had taken him approximately 3 months to identify it correctly as the sensation of not being in control. He got out of the car. The bell above the bakery door made a small sound when he pushed it open. The display cases were mostly empty at this hour. End of day, picked over, a few remaining loaves and a tray of something with a sugar glaze that had dried since morning. The girl behind the counter was young, 19 or 20, and she looked up from her phone and started to say they were closing, and then she stopped, because Dominic Kwan in a room had a particular effect on people that had nothing to do with whether they recognized him specifically and everything to do with the way he occupied space. "I'm looking for someone," he said. Anna Marsh. The girl's expression shifted in a way that told him she knew exactly who he was talking about and was deciding whether to lie. He waited. He was good at waiting. "She's in the back," the girl said finally. He heard the sound before the door from the back room opened. A voice, Amara's voice, low and a little strained, mid-sentence about tomorrow's flower order. And then the door swung open and she walked through it with a clipboard in one hand and a pencil tucked behind her ear and flour on her left forearm, and she stopped. She stopped completely. The clipboard didn't fall. She held it. She held it the way a person holds something when every other function has temporarily suspended itself and the hands are operating on a different system than the brain. He looked at her. He could not help it. He looked at the full reality of what 5 months had produced. The unmistakable shape of a pregnancy so advanced that the math was not remotely ambiguous. The exhaustion in her face that was not just the end-of-day exhaustion of a woman who'd been on her feet since 4 in the morning, but something older and more structural. And beneath both of those things, the stillness she had always carried that he had never adequately understood was armor rather than personality. "Amara," he said. Her jaw tightened. She looked at the young girl behind the counter. "Kaylee, you can go ahead and close up. I'll finish the inventory." Kaylee looked between them with the barely concealed hunger of someone who understood she was witnessing something significant and did not want to leave. She left anyway. The bell above the door made its small sound again, and then they were alone in the bakery with the display cases and the smell of sugar and yeast and the last gray afternoon light coming through the front windows. Amara set the clipboard on the counter. Slowly. She set it down like a person buying time, and he watched her do it and recognized the behavior because he did the same thing himself when a conversation was requiring him to locate reserves he hadn't accessed in a while. "How?" she said. It wasn't a full question. It didn't need to be. "Paramedic report," he said. 31st week. Your first name and a county location and a timestamp. She closed her eyes for 1 second. One single second of something that might have been fury or exhaustion or the specific frustration of a person who had been almost perfectly careful and had been undone by something completely outside their control. Then her eyes opened and they were clear and sharp, and he remembered that about her. The way she could process something terrible and come out the other side of it in the same breath. Not because she was cold, but because she was trained, professionally and personally, to look directly at damaged things and assess them accurately. "You drove," she said. She had looked past him through the window at the car across the street. "No security." "No." "Why?" He said it plainly, because he owed her that much and he knew it. "Because if I showed up any other way, you'd already be out the back door." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her expression that was not softness. It was more like the recognition of an accurate statement, the way a scientist acknowledges a correct calculation without necessarily being happy about it. "You need to leave," she said. "Amara, I'm not doing this tonight." Her voice was steady, but her left hand had moved to her side, not her stomach, not yet, but close. "I'm 33 weeks pregnant, and I've been on my feet since 4 this morning, and I am not having this conversation standing next to a dried-out display case in a town you drove to without telling anyone." "Then sit down," he said. "I'll sit down. We can do this however you want." "What I want," she said, and the word want came out with an edge that cut through the low afternoon quiet of the bakery like something physical, "is for you to have made different choices 5 months ago. Since you can't do that, the next best thing you can do is get back in your unregistered car and drive south, and let me finish what I started here." "I can't do that either." "Can't or won't?" "Both," he said. "Amara, look at me." "I am looking at you." She was, directly and without flinching, which had always been one of the things about her that had thrown him. The way she looked at him like she was looking at a damaged painting rather than a powerful man, assessing rather than reacting. "I've been looking at you for 7 months, Dominic. I looked at you the whole time, and I still missed the most important thing." "What did you miss?" "That you never chose me." She said it without heat, which made it worse than heat would have. Just a factual statement, an accurate assessment of the damage. "Not once. Not when it cost you anything. You chose your arrangement and your empire and your carefully negotiated future, and I was something that existed alongside all of that. I was convenient." The word landed the way she intended it to land. He didn't argue with it. He had spent 5 months being unable to argue with it, which was how he knew it was true. "I never lied to you," he said. "No," she agreed. "You just never told me the truth." She picked up the clipboard again, something to hold, something that gave her hands a direction. "There's a difference. You know there's a difference." "I know." He stood in the middle of the bakery, and he did not move toward her, and he did not look away from her. And he said the thing he had been building toward for 5 months, with the specific difficulty of a man who had learned early that vulnerability was a liability and had spent 38 years treating it accordingly. "I know I didn't choose you, and I know that's the thing I can't fix. I know there's no version of me showing up here that makes that not true." He stopped. Then he continued because the next part was harder, and he was making himself do it anyway. "But I'm here because I found out you exist and my child exists, and I am not a man who can know that and stay away." "I don't have the ability to stay away." Amara breathed in through her nose. Her hand had moved fully to her side now, pressing lightly against the place where the weight of the pregnancy shifted her center of gravity, and she looked at him with the expression of a woman who was actively preventing herself from being moved by something that was moving her and finding it effortful. "What you feel," she said quietly, echoing the words he had used 5 months ago in his penthouse, "doesn't change what happened." "No," he said, "it doesn't." "So what do you want, Dominic, specifically? What did you drive here to ask for?" He said it directly because she deserved directness more than she deserved anything else he could offer her. "I want to be here. For whatever's left. Whatever I'm allowed to be part of." The silence in the bakery was the particular silence of a space where the day's business is finished and the people in it haven't left yet. The refrigeration units hummed. Outside, a truck moved through Caldwell Street and its headlights swept across the window and disappeared. You're not staying here, she said finally. I know. I'm not going back to Chicago. I know that too. She looked at him for another long moment, reading the damage the way she always read damage, patiently, without sentiment, looking for the structure beneath. Then she looked down at the clipboard in her hand, and then back up at him. There's a diner 2 blocks east, she said. They close at 8. If you want to talk, we can talk there. She held up one finger, a single sharp gesture. I'm not promising anything beyond tonight. I'm not agreeing to anything. I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm saying we can sit in a booth in a public diner and you can say whatever you came here to say, and then I'm going to walk home by myself. Okay, he said. And Dominic. Her eyes met his and stayed there. If there are people outside right now that you brought, there's no one, he said. She studied him the way she studied things she wasn't certain she could trust. Then she nodded once, the small nod of a woman reserving full judgment, and she went to get her coat. The diner on Caldwell was called Harmon's, and it smelled like coffee that had been on the burner since morning and pie that had been good once and was still passable. They took a booth in the back, away from the window, and the waitress who came to them was in her 50s and had the demeanor of someone who had seen every variety of difficult conversation play out across her tables and had made her peace with not being involved in any of them. He ordered coffee. Amara ordered hot water with lemon and a piece of the cherry pie because she had learned in the last 3 months that her body's opinion about what it needed at any given hour had become significantly louder than her own. For the first 10 minutes, they did not say anything that mattered. He asked about the bakery. She answered in the minimum number of words. He asked how she was feeling. She gave him the practical answer, physically, clinically, without sentiment. The baby was healthy. Her blood pressure was slightly elevated but being monitored. She was tired in a way that sleep was addressing inadequately. He listened to all of it like a man memorizing material he had not been allowed to study. You should have told me, he said eventually. She looked at him over the rim of her mug. About the pregnancy. Yes. And what would you have done, she said. On the morning your engagement to Vivian Hahn was on every news channel in the country. What exactly would you have done with that information? He didn't answer. I'll tell you what you would have done, she said. You would have managed it. You would have gotten very quiet and very careful, and you would have started calculating. And somewhere in that calculation, I would have become a problem with a solution, not a person with a choice. And my child would have become a complication that needed to be positioned correctly. She set down the mug. I know you, Dominic. I know how you think. And I knew that the version of you that morning was not a version I could afford to be honest with. You didn't give me the chance. I gave you 7 months, she said flatly. 7 months to tell me about an arranged marriage. I gave you 7 months of my life, and you gave me a carefully managed situation with an exit strategy I wasn't informed about. So no. On that specific morning, I did not give you the chance to manage me into a corner. She looked at him steadily. I gave myself the chance to leave with something intact. He looked at his coffee cup. His jaw was tight in the way it got when he was processing something that he could not argue his way out of and did not know how to accept without argument. I'm not the same person I was that morning, he said. People say that. I know they do. He looked up. I've spent 5 months looking for you. I've spent 5 months running this specific conversation in my head, and every version of it starts with me telling you that you were right. Not as strategy, not as a way to get something. Because it's true, and I don't have a lot of practice saying true things that cost me something, and I'm saying it now because you're sitting in front of me and I don't know how much time I'm going to have. Something shifted in the quality of her silence. Not an opening, exactly. More like a door that had not been unlocked but was now being looked at from a different angle. How did you even survive 5 months without controlling everything? She said. And there was the faintest dry edge to it, the particular tone she used when something was too true to be only serious. He looked at her and said, badly. She almost smiled. She caught it before it arrived, but he saw the beginning of it, and he stored that away with the same care he stored everything that mattered. Day after day that week, he came back. He did not push. He did not position. He sat in Harmon's and he waited, and when she came, sometimes an hour after closing, sometimes not at all, They talked. Not about the past, not about Chicago, not about Vivian Hahn, or the arrangements, or the empire. They talked about small things. He asked about her work, and she told him about art restoration with the specific animation she reserved for the things she genuinely loved, and he listened the way he had listened to her in the beginning, before his world had reasserted its priorities. She watched him for manipulation the way she would have watched a painting for forgery. Systematically, without sentiment, looking for the brushstroke that was wrong. She did not find it, which did not mean it wasn't there. It meant she hadn't found it yet. On the 6th day, he came to the bakery at closing, and she was standing behind the counter with her hand pressed flat against the underside of her stomach, and her face carrying the particular expression of someone managing physical discomfort by not acknowledging it. And he pushed the door open, and she looked up, and in the same moment, something under her hand moved. She saw it register on his face before she said anything. The slight shift in the shape of her stomach, visible even from across the room. He crossed the distance between the door and the counter in 3 steps, and he stopped on the other side. And he looked at her face first, asking permission without asking, and she held his gaze for a moment, and then, without entirely deciding to, she took his right hand and she placed it against the underside of her stomach where his daughter had been pressing insistently for the past 20 minutes. He held very still. The baby kicked. She felt it against her own palm and against the back of his hand simultaneously, and she watched his face in that moment, and what she saw was not the face of a man who controlled things. It was the face of a man who had just been handed something he could not control and did not want to. His eyes went bright, and he looked down at his own hand and then back at her, and he said nothing because there was nothing that the version of language available to him at that moment was capable of carrying. She stepped back after a moment. He let his hand fall. They stood on opposite sides of the bakery counter in the quiet of 5:15 in the afternoon, and neither of them said anything for a long time. "Okay," she said finally. Her voice was not entirely steady. He looked at her. "You can come back tomorrow," she said. "That's all I'm saying. You can come back tomorrow." He nodded. He did not push past it. He picked up his coat from the stool where he'd set it, and he walked to the door, and he stopped with his hand on the frame, and he turned back once. "Amara." He said her name like it was the only word he was certain about. "I'm not going to ask you to come back. I'm not going to pressure you into anything, but I need you to know." Her phone rang. It was the new phone, the prepaid one, the number she had given to no one in Chicago. The only people who had this number were Deb Rosen and the OB clinic in the next town over. She looked at the screen. The number was not Deb's. It was not the clinic. She did not recognize it at all. She almost let it go to voicemail. Some instinct she had developed over 5 months of careful invisible living made her answer it instead, and she brought the phone to her ear, and the voice on the other end was a woman's voice, cool and precise and carrying the specific cadence of someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say but had not quite managed to drain the urgency out of it. "Ms. Bennett," the voice said, "not Marsh, not Anna. My name is Vivian Hahn. Please don't hang up. I know where you are and I know about the baby, and I need you to listen to me because my father has already given the order and you have approximately 48 hours before his people." Amara's fingers went cold around the phone. Not the gradual cold of a November sidewalk or a poorly heated room. The immediate systemic cold of a body that has just received information the nervous system classifies as threat before the conscious mind has finished processing the words. Her hand tightened around the prepaid handset, and she stood in the middle of Rosen's bakery with flour still on her forearm and Dominic 3 feet away watching her face change, and she said, very quietly, into the phone, "Say that again." "My father has already given the order," Vivian Hahn said. Her voice was the kind of control that takes years to build. Not cold by nature, but cold by training, the specific vocal register of a woman who had grown up in rooms where showing the wrong emotion at the wrong moment had consequences. "You have approximately 48 hours before his people locate your exact address. I'm telling you this because it is the only card I have left, and I'm choosing to play it in your direction. Please do not make me regret that." Amara looked at Dominic. He was reading her face the way he read everything. Fast, systematic, stripping away surface data to get to structural information. She watched him arrive at the correct conclusion before she said a single word. "How do you have this number?" Amara said. "The same way my father has your first name and your county and your employer," Vivian said. Money finds information. The difference between my father and me is what we intend to do with it. And what do you intend? To give you a way out. A pause, brief and measured. There are forged documents already prepared. 2 identities fully backstopped. One for you, one registered as your dependent. There's $4 million in a numbered account in Luxembourg that can be accessed within 6 hours of your arrival at a specific location I will provide. And there is a private flight leaving O'Hare in 51 hours that will take you to Lisbon, where my father has no operational infrastructure and no agreements with local authorities. Amara was very still. Outside on Caldwell Street, a pickup truck moved through the intersection, and its headlights swept across the bakery window, and she watched the light travel across the floor without moving her eyes from Dominic's face. "Why?" she said. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind of pause that contains something real. "Because I am not my father," Vivian said, "and because what he ordered is something I cannot be part of and remain the person I have chosen to be, and because—" She stopped. When she continued, her voice had dropped a register, and beneath the training, Amara heard something human moving. "Because I have spent 3 years in an arrangement I did not choose, and I understand more precisely than you might expect what it costs a woman to be managed by powerful men who believe their decisions supersede her existence." Amara looked at Dominic. He was watching her mouth, reading the shape of the conversation from her side of it, and she could see from the set of his jaw that he had already identified the caller and was already constructing a response. She held up one finger at him. "Wait." He waited. Whatever it cost him to wait, he paid it. "I need to think," Amara said into the phone. "You have until tomorrow morning," Vivian said. "After that, the window closes. My father's people move on confirmed intelligence, and they will have confirmation by Thursday at the latest." One more pause, then, unexpectedly, "I am sorry. For what that is worth from someone in my position. I am genuinely sorry." The line went quiet. Amara lowered the phone and set it on the counter beside the clipboard she had never finished filling out, and she stood there looking at nothing specific while her brain ran the information through every filter she had, and Dominic said, "That was Vivian." "Yes." "What did she offer you?" "Documents, money, a flight to Lisbon." She looked at him. "Her father ordered us killed. Both of us. The baby too, presumably, since a child changes succession in ways that—" She stopped. She had said us, and she was not sure when she had started including him in the category that required protecting. Dominic's face had gone completely still in the way it went still when he was moving from reaction into action, the specific stillness of a man shutting down everything non-essential to concentrate full processing power on a single problem. "Don't take it," he said. She looked at him sharply. "Don't? The offer. Don't take Vivian's offer." He moved to the window and looked out at Caldwell Street without touching the glass. "Think about what she's giving you. Documents she controls. Money in an account she knows the number to. A location she selects, using infrastructure she arranges." He turned back. "You don't escape her father by using her resources. You just trade one cage for one she holds the key to." Amara stared at him. The fury that moved through her in that moment was specific and targeted. The fury of a woman who has just been told something she had already suspected and had been hoping was wrong. "So what?" she said. "I say no to $4 million and a flight out of the country, and I do what instead?" "You come back to Chicago with me." The silence in the bakery was absolute. "You're insane," she said. "I'm the only person in this situation who has the resources to actually protect you," he said. "Not because I'm better than Vivian, because Han's operation has no reach inside my infrastructure, and he knows it. Coming at you inside my network means coming at me directly, and that is a different calculation than eliminating a woman living alone in a small town under a false name. You're asking me to walk back into the place I spent 5 months running away from. I'm asking you to choose the danger you can survive over the danger you can't." He said it without flinching. "I know what that cost you. I know what it cost you to hear me say it. But I need you to tell me I'm wrong, and you can't do it." She couldn't. She stood in the middle of the bakery with her hand against her side and the weight of 33 weeks pressing on every decision she was trying to make. And she looked at Dominic Kwan in his non-registered car, and his 5 months of searching, and his hand against her stomach 6 hours ago, and she thought about Lisbon, and she thought about a number to count, and she thought about what it meant to disappear into infrastructure controlled by a woman she had spoken to exactly once. "I have conditions," she said. "Name them." "Not tonight. Tonight I need to sleep and I need to think, and I need you to be somewhere that is not this bakery or this town when I make this decision." She looked at him directly. "If I do this, if I come back, it is not because I am coming back to you. It is because I am making a tactical decision about my child's safety. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes," he said. "Say it back to me." Something moved in his expression. Not offense, not pride, something older and more honest than either. "You're not coming back to me," he said. "You're making a choice about your daughter, and I will take whatever access to that choice you decide to give me." She nodded once. "Go back to Chicago. I'll call you by morning." He left. The bell above the door made its small sound and he was gone, and she was alone in the bakery, and she stood there for a long time listening to the refrigeration unit's hum and the distant sound of Caldwell Street and her own heartbeat, which was faster than it should have been. She called Deb Rosen at 7 that evening and told her she needed to take emergency leave and wasn't certain when she would be back. Deb asked one question: "Are you safe right now?" And when Amara said yes, Deb said, "You call me when you land somewhere, Anna, whatever that means." She did not ask any of the other questions she clearly had. Amara thought that Deb Rosen was possibly the best person she had met in the past year, and she was leaving her behind too. She packed in 20 minutes. She had never entirely unpacked in Millhaven, another instinct she had not consciously articulated but had apparently understood from the beginning, and the two suitcases came together with a speed that said something unflattering about how ready she had always been to move again. She took the scorched triangle of ultrasound photograph from the inner pocket of her coat and transferred it to the new coat, and that was the most deliberate thing she did. She called Dominic at 11:15. "I'm coming," she said, "but I'm driving myself. I need you to text me an address that is not your penthouse." "I have a property in Lincoln Park," he said. "A building I keep off the primary records. Security is internal, no external firm." "Send it." He sent it. She drove south through the night with the heat on high and the radio off, and the dark farmland of northern Illinois moving past the windows like something being slowly erased. And she thought about Vivian Hahn's voice on the phone, the layer beneath the training, the thing that had sounded like exhaustion. And she stored it away the way she stored everything that didn't fit the obvious explanation. Because in her professional experience, the things that didn't fit the obvious explanation were usually the most structurally important things present. She arrived in Lincoln Park at 2:40 in the morning. The building was a converted warehouse on a residential block, 4 stories, unmarked, a ground-level entrance that required 2 key codes. She had been texted en route. Dominic met her in the lobby. He did not try to take her bags. He showed her the apartment on the 3rd floor, the security panel, the lines of communication. He showed her the room that had been prepared. Simply, without presupposition, a bed and a chair and a window with a blackout shade. And he showed her the adjoining room that he would be using, and he said clearly, "There's a lock on your door, and the key is on the inside." She looked at him. "I know," he said quietly. "Get some sleep." She locked the door. She lay down fully clothed on the bed in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and her daughter moved inside her, the small, slow movement of a child who was sleeping better than her mother was. And Amara pressed her hand against her own stomach and said nothing, and thought about 48 hours and Lisbon and a woman's voice saying, "I am genuinely sorry," with something underneath it that she had not yet fully decoded. She was still thinking about it when she fell asleep. She woke at 7 to the sound of voices in the main room. Not raised voices, controlled voices, which in Dominic's world were often more alarming than raised ones. She was on her feet and at the door before she was fully conscious, the instincts of 5 months of careful living moving her body before her mind had finished catching up. She unlocked the door and opened it and found Dominic standing in the middle of the living area with Marcus on one side and a man she didn't know on the other side, and all 3 of them looking at a laptop screen with expressions that occupied the specific range between serious and catastrophic. "What happened?" she said. All 3 men looked at her. Marcus's expression told her something she didn't want to know. The stranger looked at Dominic. Dominic looked at Amara. James Hahn moved up his timeline, Dominic said. His people were in Millhaven last night, 2 hours after you left. He paused. They went to the bakery first, then your apartment. The floor felt briefly unreliable. She put one hand against the doorframe. Deb! She's fine, Dominic said immediately. She told them the bakery was closed and she didn't know any Anna Marsh beyond a former employee who had left on short notice. Han's people have no reason to push harder on a 64-year-old bakery owner. He stopped. But they found the apartment, your actual apartment. They went through it. There's nothing there, Amar said. I didn't leave anything. There was a library book, the stranger said. She looked at him. On the nightstand, he said. He was young, early 30s, the kind of flat-voiced, precise manner that suggested either law enforcement background or someone who had spent significant time around it. Checked out on a library card registered under a variant spelling your contact in Evanston used as a buffer identity. It took Han's people approximately 4 hours to walk that card back to the paralegal who created your Anna Marsh documents. The cold came back. Systemic. Complete. Petra, Amara said. They picked her up at her apartment in Evanston at 3 this morning, Dominic said. She's not hurt. She's being held at a location we're working to identify. Han is using her as leverage to locate you. Amara stared at him. The sequence of information arrived in her mind and arranged itself with the terrible clarity of a woman who had spent her professional life reading damaged structures for their load-bearing elements. And what she saw when she read this one was a chain of causation that led directly back to a library book on a nightstand in a town she had almost managed to disappear inside. This is my fault, she said. No, Dominic said. Don't. Her voice came out harder than she intended. Don't manage this into something it isn't. A library book. I left a library book on a nightstand because I was tired and I was comfortable and I stopped being as careful as I needed to be. She pressed both hands against the door frame and breathed through her nose. Petra's in a holding location because of a library book I left on a nightstand. That is what happened. I need to know that is what happened. No one in the room argued with her. She pushed off the doorframe and walked into the living area and stood in front of the laptop and looked at the screen. It showed a map with several marked locations and a series of timestamps and a photograph of a building she didn't recognize. Tell me everything you know, she said to the stranger. He looked at Dominic. Dominic nodded. My name is Cole, the man said. I run intelligence operations for Kwan's organization. What we know is this. He turned the laptop toward her and began walking her through the map with the deliberate efficiency of a man briefing someone he had just decided to treat as a principal rather than a variable. Han's people are currently operating from 3 locations in the metro area. His primary asset in Chicago is a federal prosecutor named Garrett, who has been embedded in Han's operation for approximately 2 years, running interference on investigations that would otherwise have reached Han's import infrastructure. What we did not know until 40 minutes ago, he stopped. Say it, Amara said. Cole looked at Dominic again. Cole? Amara said. Look at me, not at him. Say what you were going to say. Cole looked at her. What we did not know until 40 minutes ago is that Garrett has an active federal investigation open on Dominic's organization. It has been open for 14 months. Han has been feeding Garrett's investigation while simultaneously negotiating the marriage alliance, which means the alliance was never intended to produce a merger. He paused for exactly 1 beat. It was intended to produce a controlled demolition. Han marries his daughter to Dominic, waits for the ceremony to create a legal paper trail connecting the 2 organizations, and then Garrett moves. Han absorbs the pieces. Clean. No war, no bodies, just a federal investigation that takes everything Dominic built and hands the operational infrastructure to Han's network. The room was very quiet. Amara looked at Dominic. His face had the particular quality of a man who has just seen the architecture of a long deception laid out in full and is simultaneously processing the technical dimensions of the betrayal and the personal ones. His jaw was set. His eyes were doing the thing they did when he was moving fast through calculations she couldn't follow, running scenarios, testing outcomes, discarding the ones that didn't hold. Vivian knew, Amara said. It was not a question. We don't know how much she knew, Cole said. She called me, Amara said. She offered me a way out before this information was on your screen. Either she knew enough to understand what was coming and she chose to warn me rather than let it play out, or she stopped. She turned it over the way she turned damaged surfaces over, looking at it from the other angle. Or she's been running her own play this entire time and the call to me last night was part of it. Which means we can't trust the offer, Dominic said. Which means we can't trust it or dismiss it, Amar said. Those are two different things. She looked at the map on the laptop screen. Where is Vivian right now? Cole typed something. Her last confirmed location was her father's Gold Coast residence as of 10 p.m. last night. She has not been seen since. She's running, Amara said. Or she's been contained, Marcus said from the corner. It was the first thing he had said since Amara came out of the bedroom, and he said it with the flatness of a man who had been thinking it for several minutes and had decided it needed to be in the room. The possibility landed on all of them at once. Amara looked at the map. She looked at the timestamps. She looked at the photograph of the building she didn't recognize and said, "What's that?" "Han's secondary Chicago location," Cole said. "We believe it's where Petra is being held." She studied the photograph. It was a commercial building, mid-block, the kind of anonymous urban structure that could contain offices or storage or anything else behind its identical windows. She looked at the fire exit visible at the building's east corner and the loading dock on the south face, and the gap between this building and the one adjacent to it that was either an alley or a maintenance access. "This building," she said. "What's on the floors above the loading dock?" Cole looked at her. "Why?" "Because the windows on those floors are different from the windows on the street-facing side," she said. "Different age of glass. That section of the building was retrofitted later than the rest. The original structure had different load-bearing walls." She looked at Cole. "Is there a floor plan?" Cole stared at her for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating an assumption in real time. Then he typed. Dominic was watching her. She could feel his attention the way you feel weight. Specific, concentrated, directed. She did not look at him. "There's no floor plan in the public record," Cole said. "Building permits go back to 1987, and the retrofit you're describing would have been—" He stopped. He was reading something on a second screen. 2003, which means the interior configuration on floors 3 and 4 is not in any document we have access to. "Get me the permit application for the 2003 retrofit," Amara said. "Permit applications require structural drawings. They're public record. Whoever pulled those permits had to file an existing conditions survey as part of the submission." Cole looked at Dominic. "Do what she says," Dominic said. It took Cole 11 minutes to pull the permit file from the city's building department archive. He turned the laptop to face her, and she leaned over the table and she looked at the structural drawing with the focused silence of a woman who had spent 8 years reading the hidden architecture of things. And what she saw on floors 3 and 4 of that building was a layout that had 2 interior stairwells, one of which did not connect to the ground floor elevator lobby and was instead accessible only from the loading dock level. "That stairwell," she said. She put her finger on the screen. "It's a service access. It was put in for the freight elevator they added in 2003. It comes up through the south face of the building inside the loading dock envelope, which means it's not visible from the street." She straightened up. "If I were holding someone and I didn't want them visible on entry or exit, I would use that stairwell." The room was quiet in a different way now. Not the quiet of information being processed. The quiet of a group of people who have just watched a variable they had categorized one way reveal itself to be something entirely different. Marcus said carefully, "How do you know how to read structural drawings?" "Because art conservation requires understanding the buildings that contain the art," Amara said. "Walls, load-bearing structures, humidity conduits, ventilation. You cannot restore a painting properly without understanding the architecture it lives in." She looked at Marcus. "I have spent 8 years learning how to find the things that are hidden inside structures by reading what's visible on the surface." She looked at Dominic. He was looking back at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the calculation she knew, not the management, something older and more unguarded than either of those things. "Petra is in that building," Amara said. "And we have approximately—" She looked at Cole. How long before Han's people confirm I'm no longer in Millhaven? 8 hours, Cole said. Maybe less. Then we have 8 hours to do two things simultaneously, Amara said. Get Petra out of that building and figure out what Vivian Hahn is actually doing. She straightened fully and she looked around the room at three men who had spent their professional lives operating in a world she had spent her personal life carefully avoiding, and she said the thing she had been building toward since 2:40 in the morning, since the moment she had walked through the lobby door of this building, having made a decision she could not unmake. I need to be in every room where decisions are being made, not briefed afterward, not consulted selectively. Every room, every conversation. If I'm inside this, I'm inside it completely. Do you all understand that? Marcus looked at Dominic. Dominic said, She's right. From now on, she's in every room. Marcus absorbed this with the expression of a man who had significant reservations and had just decided that voicing them would not be the most productive use of the next 8 hours. Cole had already turned back to his screens. Amara looked at the structural drawing on the laptop one more time, and then she looked at the window on the east wall of the apartment where the early morning light of Chicago was beginning to define the roof lines of Lincoln Park. And she thought about Petra in a building she had just read from a permit application. And she thought about a corrupt federal prosecutor named Garrett who had been running an investigation for 14 months. And she thought about Vivian Hahn, who had either played the most dangerous double game she had ever encountered or was currently being held somewhere by a father who had just discovered that his daughter had called his target on a prepaid phone the night before. And then Amara's own phone buzzed on the table beside the laptop. A text from the number Vivian had called from the night before. 4 words. He knows I called. Amara stared at the 4 words, and the room around her continued in its motion. Cole typing, Marcus moving toward the door, Dominic watching her. And she understood in that moment with the specific clarity of a woman who had burned her own future in a kitchen sink and survived it, that the next decision she made was not a decision she could take back, was not a position she could retreat from, was not a version of herself she could return to once she stepped through. 4 words on a screen. He knows I called. Amara read them twice, not because she hadn't understood them the first time, but because her brain was doing what it always did when confronted with structural information that changed the load-bearing calculations of everything built on top of it, running the implications outward in every direction simultaneously, testing which walls were still standing and which ones had just become rubble. Vivian's been compromised, she said. Dominic was already reading over her shoulder. She felt the change in his breathing, the slight deceleration that meant he had shifted fully into operational mode, the place where emotion was not absent but had been filed under later with the efficiency of a man who had learned early that feelings were a resource to be managed rather than expressed. Cole, he said. Already pulling her last known location, Cole said without looking up. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the specific urgency of someone who has just watched a 6-hour window collapse into something considerably shorter. Gold Coast residence, no movement since 10 p.m. Her personal security detail checked in with the building at midnight and went dark after that. Her father pulled her detail, Marcus said from the doorway. He said it the way he said most things, flat, factual, without editorial comment, because Marcus had learned somewhere along the way that the most frightening assessments were the ones delivered without inflection. Amara set the phone down. She looked at the structural drawing still open on the laptop, and she looked at the map with its 3 marked locations, and she looked at the text message, and she ran the calculation. He didn't just pull her detail, Amara said. He contained her, the same way he contained Petra, which means he now has 2 leverage points instead of 1. And he knows I'm no longer in Millhaven, and he knows Vivian contacted me, and he is sitting somewhere in this city right now watching every exit close. He doesn't know where you are, Dominic said. Not yet, Amara said. How long does not yet last? Dominic looked at Cole. The Lincoln Park property is clean, Cole said. No paper trail to Kwan's name or any affiliated entity. We have maybe... He stopped. He was looking at a different screen now, and his face had shifted into an expression Amara had not seen on it before, which was the expression of a man encountering information that has just made the situation significantly worse. We have a problem. We have several problems, Dominic said. Which one? Garrett moved up his timeline too. Cole turned the second screen so the room could see it. It showed a federal filing. Amara couldn't read the specific language from where she stood, but she could read Cole's face reading it. There's a sealed warrant issued this morning at 6:47 a.m. It's broad. Quan Holdings and all affiliated entities. They're moving today. The room went completely still. Dominic stood in the center of it, and he absorbed this information with the stillness of a man standing inside an explosion that hasn't finished expanding yet. Amara watched his face, and she watched him understand, in real time, what the warrant meant. Not just legally, but structurally. The specific way a sealed federal warrant issued on the morning of James Hahn's operational push was not a coincidence, but a coordinated detonation. 2 charges placed and timed to go off simultaneously so that there was no direction to run that wasn't already covered. Hahn called in Garrett, Amara said. He moved the federal piece up because Vivian's call changed his schedule. He knows something shifted. He doesn't know what exactly, so he's accelerating everything at once. If Garrett moves before we can, Marcus started. We can't let Garrett move, Amara said. The warrant goes into effect, and everything Dominic has built becomes evidence in a federal case, and Hahn walks in and takes the pieces, and Vivian and Petra are both leverage that becomes worthless the moment there's nothing left to leverage against. She pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the map and the structural drawing and the warrant on Cole's screen, and she made the decision that she had been building towards since the moment Vivian Hahn's voice came through a prepaid phone in a bakery on Caldwell Street, the decision that was not reversible, the decision that required her to become something she had spent 31 years being very careful not to become. We need Vivian's recordings. Everyone looked at her. On the phone last night, she said she had evidence of her father's conspiracy. Recordings. She didn't say how many or what format, but she said she had been building a case. Amara stood straight. She offered me a way out. What she actually had was a weapon, and she was going to spend it on getting me to safety because that was the play available to her at that moment. But if we can get to Vivian before Hahn locks her down completely, those recordings don't go toward buying my escape. They go toward burning Hahn's operation down in front of every crime family in this city before Garrett can execute that warrant. Silence. Then Cole said very carefully, "You're talking about walking into James Hahn's Gold Coast residence." "I'm talking about finding Vivian before she disappears into her father's version of protective custody," Amara said, "which is different." "Not significantly," Marcus said. "Significantly enough." She looked at Dominic. "You said I'm in every room. This is a room. Tell me I'm wrong." He looked at her for a long moment with the expression she had been cataloging over the past week, the one that wasn't calculation, the one that was something rawer and less managed than calculation. And he said, "You're not wrong. You're also 33 weeks pregnant." "I'm aware of that." "Amara." "Dominic." She held his gaze. "I am the only person in this room who Vivian Hahn trusted enough to call last night. I am the only person in this room who she warned. If you send Marcus to that residence, Vivian's father sees a threat. If you send Cole, he sees an intelligence operation. If I go—" She stopped. "If I go, he sees a pregnant woman trying to negotiate her own survival. And he is arrogant enough to believe that is all I am." Marcus made a sound that was not quite a word. "She's right," Cole said quietly. He said it like it cost him something to say it. Hahn's psychological profile runs toward underestimating women in non-operational roles. It's a documented pattern in his organizational behavior. He's never once correctly assessed a threat that presented as domestic or personal. Dominic looked at Amara for another full 3 seconds. Then he looked away, which was its own kind of answer. "We do this together," he said. "You do not go into that building without me." "I wasn't planning to," she said. They moved within the hour. Cole stayed at the Lincoln Park apartment, running communications and monitoring the federal warrant for any sign of movement. Marcus drove. Dominic sat in the front passenger seat with his phone against his ear, running 3 conversations simultaneously. One with a lawyer he trusted, one with a contact inside the federal building whose name Amara was not given, and one that he ended abruptly when they turned onto the Gold Coast block and he said one word into the phone, "Done," and put it in his pocket. Amara sat in the back and watched Chicago move past the window and breathed carefully through her nose the way she had been breathing for weeks, the measured breath of a woman managing a body that had its own urgent opinions about everything. And she thought about Vivian Hahn's voice and the layer underneath the training, and she pressed the scorched corner of the ultrasound photograph against her sternum through the fabric of her coat. And she did not think about being afraid because fear was not a resource she had available, and she was not going to spend what she didn't have. The Hahn residence was a 4-story limestone townhouse on a block where the buildings were close together, and the trees were old, and the kind of money that occupied this street was old enough not to need to announce itself. There were 2 men at the front entrance, not uniformed, not obvious, but positioned with the specific economy of movement that said security to anyone who knew what they were looking at, which Amara now did. "Side entrance," Marcus said quietly. "No," Amara said. "Front door." Marcus looked in the rearview mirror. She met his eyes in it. "If we go in a side entrance, we are running an operation," she said. "If we go in the front door, we are guests." "We are not guests," Marcus said. "Hahn doesn't know that yet," she said. "That's the only advantage we have. It lasts approximately as long as it takes for his security to call upstairs, so we need to be inside before they make that call." She got out of the car before anyone could argue. She walked up the front steps of the Hahn residence at 8:47 in the morning in a coat that did not fully close over 33 weeks of pregnancy, and she rang the front bell, and she stood on the top step with her hands visible and her face composed into the specific expression she used when she was examining something extremely damaged and extremely valuable and needed the people around her to understand that she was the most qualified person in the room. The door opened. One of the 2 security men closer now, his eyes moving over her with professional speed and landing on the pregnancy with the particular recalibration that happened when threat assessment encountered something unexpected. "Amara Bennett," she said. "I'm here to see James Hahn. He's been looking for me. I thought I'd save him the trouble." The man's face did not change. His hand moved slightly toward his earpiece. "Tell him," Amara said, "that I have something he needs before the federal warrant executes this morning. Tell him he has about 90 minutes to decide whether he wants to hear it from me directly or read about it in an indictment." The man looked past her. He saw Dominic coming up the steps behind her. Something moved in his expression, a recalculation, a threat reassessment, a new set of variables being fed into a system that had not been configured to handle this particular combination of inputs. He spoke quietly into his earpiece. They waited. 40 seconds. The door opened wider. James Hahn received them in a room on the 2nd floor that was designed to communicate power through restraint. Dark wood, minimal furniture, nothing decorative that wasn't also expensive. The room of a man who understood that true authority did not require display. He was 61 and compact and had the particular stillness of a man who had been dangerous for so long that it had become his resting state. He looked at Dominic first, the way men like him always looked at men like Dominic first, the reflex assessment of arrival. And then he looked at Amara and his eyes moved over the pregnancy, and he produced a slight smile that did not reach anything above his mouth. "Ms. Bennett," he said, "this is unexpected." "I imagine it is," she said. "Please sit." She sat. Dominic remained standing, which was a message Hahn received and filed without comment. Hahn took the chair across from Amara and crossed one leg over the other and looked at her with the patience of a man who believed he was in complete control of whatever was about to happen. "You said you have something I need," Hahn said. "I said I have something you need before the federal warrant executes," Amara said. "Those are related but different things. What I have is a conversation I'd like to have with your daughter before that warrant changes the terms of everything you've spent 3 years building." Hahn's expression did not change. "My daughter is not available." "I know," Amara said. "That's why I'm here instead of calling her." She looked at him with the same direct patience she used on damaged paintings, the patience of someone who had learned that surfaces revealed themselves on their own timeline and could not be rushed without causing further damage. "Mr. Hahn, I understand what you've built. I understand the precision of it, the marriage alliance, the federal case running underneath it. The timing designed so that everything collapses in the right sequence. It is an extraordinarily constructed plan. She paused. It has one flaw. Han waited. Your daughter is not an instrument, Amar said. She is a person who has been making her own decisions inside your structure for longer than you've noticed. And one of those decisions produced 43 hours of recorded conversations that are not in any location you currently control. The room changed temperature. It was not a dramatic change. Han's expression did not collapse. His body did not shift. His hands did not move. But something in the quality of the air in the room altered in a way that Amara felt against her skin, the way you feel a storm system moving before the weather actually changes. You're speculating, Han said. I'm not, she said. And you know I'm not because you pulled your daughter's security detail at midnight, which means she called you or you found the call log, and you understood immediately what a call to me meant in terms of what she had been doing inside your organization for however long she'd been doing it. She held his gaze. The question is not whether the recordings exist. The question is whether you want to spend the next 90 minutes trying to find them or whether you want to hear what I'm actually offering you. Han looked at Dominic for the first time since they had sat down. You brought her here to negotiate. She brought herself, Dominic said. I came because she's carrying my daughter, and I go where she goes. Han looked back at Amara. Something shifted in his assessment of her. She felt it, the recalibration, the same one that had been happening in rooms full of men since she walked into the Lincoln Park apartment that morning and read a structural drawing from a permit file. What are you offering? Han said. A room, she said. All of us. You, your daughter, Dominic, me. Before Garrett moves, before the warrant executes, before the recordings go anywhere that makes this conversation irrelevant. She leaned forward slightly, the small lean of a woman who is not performing confidence but who has simply calculated correctly and knows it. You spent 3 years engineering a controlled demolition. I'm offering you the chance to decide what you actually want to walk away with before the charges go off. Han was quiet for a long moment. In that moment, Amara heard the building around them, the sound of Chicago outside, the low hum of a city that did not care about any of this, the distant sound of a door on another floor, and then footsteps that were moving with a pace that was not quite urgent but was not quite calm either. Han looked toward the door. It opened. Vivian Han walked in. She was wearing the same clothes she had been wearing in her last confirmed photograph from the night before, and her hair was not arranged the way it was in any photograph Amara had seen of her, and her face was carrying something that had gotten past the training, something raw and exhausted and furious in equal parts. Behind her was a man Amara didn't know who stopped in the doorway with the expression of someone who had been told to bring her and was not certain he had done the right thing. Vivian looked at her father. Then she looked at Amara. Then she looked at Dominic. You came, she said to Amara. It was not surprise exactly. It was the sound of a calculation that had been uncertain being confirmed. You warned me, Amara said. That meant something. Vivian looked at her father again. Han was watching his daughter with the expression of a man confronting a version of a person he thought he knew completely and finding that the version in front of him had significant undocumented features. Sit down, Vivian, he said. I'll stand, she said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Han looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he looked at Amara. Then he uncrossed his leg and placed both feet on the floor and said, What exactly do you think happens next? Here's what happens next, Amara said. Vivian gives me access to the recordings. Today. In the next 2 hours. We organize them. I organize them because organizing hidden information inside a complex structure is what I have done professionally for 8 years, into a presentation that can be delivered to the commission leadership before Garrett executes the warrant. The recordings expose Garrett's arrangement with your organization. Garrett becomes a liability to every family in this country who has had federal exposure in the last 2 years because of cases he was supposed to be managing. The commission pulls his protection. Federal Internal Affairs has been watching Garrett for unrelated reasons for 8 months. Cole confirmed that this morning. And without the commission's interference, their existing case proceeds. She breathed. Your plan to absorb Dominic's organization through a federal demolition requires Garrett to be operable. Without Garrett, the warrant doesn't hold. Without the warrant, there is no controlled demolition. And without the demolition, there is no plan, Han said. There is no plan, Amar confirmed. Han looked at Vivian. Vivian looked back at her father with the look of a woman who has been waiting for this room to exist for a very long time and is not going to waste it by looking away. The recordings, Han said to his daughter. Not a question. A confirmation of something he had already concluded. 43 hours, Vivian said. Every conversation you had with Garrett in the last 22 months. Every financial transfer. Every instruction. She paused. I started collecting them 14 months ago, 2 months after I understood what the wedding was actually for. Han looked at his daughter for a long time. Whatever moved across his face in that moment was complicated in a way that Amara had not expected from a man she had assessed as operating without complication. You would burn everything I built, he said. I would burn the part of it that requires burning people, Vivian said. Yes. Han stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the Gold Coast street below, and he stood there for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 45 seconds, and Amara sat in the chair across from where he had been sitting, and she breathed through her nose in the measured way, and she did not look at Dominic, and she did not look at Vivian, and she looked at Han's back, and she waited. Petra was in a building 4 miles from this room. Garrett's warrant was moving through a federal courthouse. 43 hours of recordings were in a location only Vivian knew, and somewhere in the sequence of the next 90 minutes, everything was either going to hold or it wasn't. Han turned from the window. He looked at Amaro with the expression of a man who has just revised his assessment of a situation so completely that the revision itself is the most significant thing that has happened to him in years. You're not here to negotiate, he said. You came to close this. Yes, she said. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he looked at Vivian. Get the recordings, he said. Vivian moved. What happened in the next 4 hours was not elegant. It was not the clean, decisive sequence that plans look like before they encounter the actual weight of execution. It was Amara on her feet for 3 hours in a room on the second floor of the Han residence with a laptop and an external drive, and 43 hours of audio organized by date and cross-referenced against a financial record that Vivian had been building in a private encrypted folder for 14 months, and her lower back announcing itself with increasing persistence, and Dominic bringing her water twice without being asked and saying nothing else, and Cole on the phone from Lincoln Park walking her through the commission's communication infrastructure so she knew exactly where to send what, and Marcus somewhere in the building doing something she was not told about and did not ask. She built the presentation the way she built everything, from the structural evidence outward. The oldest recordings first, establishing the relationship. Then the financial transfers, time-stamped and matched to specific federal case decisions that had gone wrong for Dominic's competitors over the past year. Then the most recent conversations, Han and Garrett, 4 days ago, discussing the warrant timeline and the post-demolition asset distribution with the specific casual comfort of 2 men who believed they were not being recorded. At 12:19 p.m., she sent the package to 7 addresses that Cole had provided, each one a senior commission representative in a different city, and she sent a simultaneous copy to the Internal Affairs Division of the Federal District with a cover document she wrote herself in 40 minutes. Clinical, precise, structured like an expert assessment, which it was. At 12:34, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered it. A man's voice, older, with the flat vowels of the Midwest and the specific tone of someone accustomed to being the person who closed conversations rather than opened them, said, "Who am I speaking to?" "Amara Bennett," she said. "Art conservator?" A pause. "You put together the package?" "Yes." Another pause, longer. "The Garrett recordings are legitimate?" "Yes." "We'll need to verify." "You have the financial records that match them," she said. "Verification will take you approximately 2 hours. The federal warrant is scheduled to execute at 3 p.m. I'd suggest you use the time accordingly." She ended the call. She set the phone on the table and she pressed both hands flat against the surface, and she breathed, and her daughter chose that specific moment to move. A long, slow, rolling movement. Not the sharp kick of the bakery counter, but something more deliberate. Something that felt in the particular way that exhausted and overextended people find meaning in physical sensation, like an acknowledgement. Dominic was watching her from across the room. She looked up and found his eyes, and she held them for a moment without speaking, and he did not speak either. And in the silence between them was everything they had not said to each other, and everything they were going to have to say eventually, and the understanding that eventually was not now, was not today, was not in this room with Han's laptop and Vivian's recordings and 43 hours of a powerful man's conversations arranged into a weapon that was currently traveling through commission infrastructure at the speed of encrypted email. At 1:47 p.m., Cole called. "Garrett's warrant has been suspended," he said. "Emergency motion from the commission's legal infrastructure. They have 3 judges they can reach in under an hour when they need to. The suspension is temporary, but it blocks execution pending review." He paused. "And Garrett's not answering his federal office phone. His assistant says he left the building at 1:15 and didn't say where he was going." "He's running," Amara said. "He won't get far," Cole said. "Internal Affairs has been sitting on him for 8 months. They just needed the commission to stop running interference. They stopped running interference approximately 40 minutes ago." Amara set the phone down. She looked at Vivian, who was standing at the window of her father's second-floor room, looking out at the Gold Coast street with the expression of a woman who has just done the most significant thing of her life and is not yet certain how she feels about what it cost. She looked at Han, who was seated in the corner of the room in a chair he had not moved from for the past 2 hours, looking at nothing in particular with the face of a man watching something he built for years disassemble itself in an afternoon. She looked at Dominic. And then her body said something that her brain had been ignoring for the past 4 hours with the focused determination of a woman who had a presentation to finish and a warrant to stop and a corrupt federal prosecutor to expose. Something that her body had apparently been trying to communicate since approximately 10:30 that morning and had now decided to communicate with a clarity that was impossible to set aside or file under later. She gripped the edge of the table. Dominic was across the room in 3 steps. "Amara." "I'm fine," she said. The words came out steady, and she was proud of that, the steadiness of them, right up until the next contraction arrived, and the steadiness became something she was managing rather than something she actually had. "How long?" he said. She looked at him. She looked at the clock on the wall. 1:53 p.m. She did backward arithmetic against the timeline of the morning, and the answer she arrived at was not the answer she had been hoping for. "Since about 10:30, she said. He stared at her. "I had a presentation to finish," she said. "Amara." "The presentation is finished," she said. "Garrett is running. The warrant is suspended. Petra is—" She looked at Marcus, who had reappeared in the doorway at some point in the last hour. "Is Petra, She's out," Marcus said. "She's at Northwestern Memorial. She's fine. Minor dehydration, no other injuries." Amara breathed out. The relief of it moved through her like something structural releasing, a load-bearing tension that had been in place since 3 in the morning and was now, finally, no longer required. She looked at Dominic. "We need to go to the hospital," she said very calmly. And then the next contraction arrived and calm became relative, and Dominic's hand found her arm, and she did not pull away from it. And in the window of the room, Vivian Han turned from the street and watched them. And something on her face was not quite a smile, but was in the same territory. The expression of a woman watching a thing she helped to. The contraction lasted 40 seconds. Amara counted them against the back of her teeth the way she had been counting everything for the past 4 hours. Precisely, without drama, with the specific attention of a woman who had learned that accurate measurement was the only reliable defense against being surprised by the size of things. 40 seconds. Then it released, and she straightened, and she looked at Dominic's hand on her arm, and she did not shake it off. "Car," she said. Marcus was already moving. Vivian said something behind them. Amara caught the word hospital and the word I'll call. And then they were in the hallway and on the stairs, and the Gold Coast afternoon was coming through the front windows of the Han residence in long, pale rectangles. And Amara moved through them thinking about nothing except the next step and the one after that, which was the only useful way to think, when the thing that was happening was larger than your ability to plan around it. Outside, the air hit her like a hand against the face. Cold, specific, Chicago cold. She breathed it in and it helped. Marcus had the car at the curb and the door open before they reached the bottom step, and she got in, and Dominic got in beside her, and Marcus was driving before the door fully closed. "Northwestern," Dominic said. "I know where I'm going," Marcus said, and pulled into traffic. Amara leaned her head back against the seat. The city moved past the windows, the limestone facades of the Gold Coast giving way to the glass towers of Streeterville, the lake appearing briefly between buildings, gray and enormous and indifferent. And she closed her eyes and pressed her hand against her stomach and felt her daughter moving, still moving, the small, persistent movement of a child who had decided that whatever was happening on the outside was not going to interrupt what she was doing on the inside. "I need you to call Cole," Amara said without opening her eyes. "Tell him to monitor the Garrett situation. If Internal Affairs moves to arrest before the Commission formally strips Han's protection, the warrant suspension could be challenged." "Amara," Dominic said, "I'm serious. There's a sequencing problem in the—" "Amara." His voice was different from the voice he used for everything else, lower, without the management in it. "Stop." She opened her eyes. He was looking at her the way he had looked at his hand against her stomach in the bakery, with the specific unguardedness of a man who has run out of armor and has decided, in the absence of any other option, to simply exist without it. "You just dismantled a 3-year criminal conspiracy from a chair in the man's own house," he said. "While you were in labor, you were allowed to stop working for approximately the length of a car ride." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the ceiling of the car. Then, to her own significant surprise, she laughed. It was not a long laugh or a graceful one. It was the laugh of a woman who has been running on controlled adrenaline for 22 hours and has just been offered the first moment of absurdity large enough to puncture it, the particular laugh of exhaustion and relief, and the specific ridiculousness of the situation presented plainly. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. The corners of his eyes did something that, on a different face, would have been a smile. The next contraction arrived 4 minutes later and was not funny at all. Northwestern Memorial received them at 2:17 p.m. Amara was processed with the efficiency of a hospital that had seen everything and was not going to waste time being surprised by a woman in active labor who arrived in a car with 2 men and flowers still faintly visible on her left forearm. A nurse named Deborah, not Deb from the bakery, a different Deborah, though Amara noted the coincidence with the slightly unhinged clarity of a mind that catalogs everything even when the body is otherwise occupied, took her vitals and confirmed what Amara's body had been telling her since 10:30 that morning, and told her she was further along than most women who arrived with this level of composure. "Most women," Amara said, "haven't had my morning." Deborah the nurse looked at her, then at Dominic, then back at Amara with the expression of a woman who had been in labor and delivery for 19 years and had developed a comprehensive appreciation for understatement. "Let's get you to a room," she said. Dominic stayed. She had not told him to stay and she had not told him to leave, and he had interpreted the absence of instruction correctly, which was itself a development she noticed without commenting on. He sat in the chair in the corner of the room and he did not speak unless she spoke first, and he did not try to manage the situation or optimize it or control any of the variables because there were no variables available to him, which she suspected was the most difficult thing he had experienced in decades. She labored for 4 hours and 11 minutes. It was not a story she would tell as easy. Nothing about it was easy, and she had never been the kind of woman who performed ease she didn't have, but it was a story she would tell as her own, completely and without qualification, which was the thing that mattered. Her daughter was born at 6:28 p.m. on a Wednesday in November. She was 6 pounds and 4 ounces, and she arrived in the world with the emphatic announcement of someone who had been waiting and was not going to be understated about the fact of her arrival. Amara held her before she was fully cleaned, and she looked at the small, fierce, red-faced person in her arms, and she felt something that had no accurate name in any language she knew. Not happiness exactly, not relief exactly, something older and more fundamental than either. The specific feeling of a structure that has been under enormous stress for a very long time discovering, in a single moment, what it was actually built to hold. Dominic was standing at the edge of the room. He had stood up when it happened, and he was standing very still, in the way he went still when something had exceeded the reach of his control, and he had stopped trying to extend it. She looked at him over the top of her daughter's head. "Come here," she said. He crossed the room. He stopped at the bedside, and he looked at the child in her arms, and his face did the thing she had seen it do once before, in the bakery, when the baby had kicked against his palm. The thing that was not calculation, not management, not the carefully maintained composure of a man who had spent 38 years treating vulnerability as a liability. His jaw moved. His eyes went bright, and he held them steady by an effort she could visibly see him making, and she respected him for making it without looking away. "Her name," he said. His voice was not entirely even. "I've been thinking about it," Amara said. "For weeks." She looked down at the small face in the crook of her arm. The child had stopped crying and was engaged in the serious business of existing, her eyes closed, her hands impossibly small against Amara's hospital gown. "Nora," Amara said. "Nora Grace Bennett." He was quiet for a moment. "Bennett?" "For now," Amara said. She looked up at him. "For now" means what it means. It doesn't mean never. It means I'm not making decisions about identity and names and what things are called when I've been awake for 22 hours, and I just finished dismantling a federal conspiracy. She held his gaze. It means ask me again when we've both had sleep and the situation is settled and we can have that conversation like two adults who are not operating on adrenaline and fear. "Okay," he said. "That's it?" "Okay." "That's it," he said. "Okay." She looked at him for another moment. Then she looked back at Nora Grace Bennett, who had just made a small sound that was not a cry, but was its own kind of statement. And she thought that for a person with her particular history of controlled environments and managed expectations, she was handling the absolute unmanageability of this moment better than she had any right to expect. 3 days later, Amara was released from Northwestern Memorial with a daughter and a folder of discharge paperwork and a level of physical exhaustion that she had no useful comparison for. Petra was in the waiting room. She had been in the waiting room, apparently, for most of the previous 2 days, sustained by vending machine coffee and the particular stubbornness of a woman who had been held in a warehouse by James Hahn's people and was not going to let that experience stop her from being present for her best friend's baby. Amara walked into the waiting room and saw Petra, and Petra saw her and the baby, and she stood up from the plastic chair, and her face collapsed in a way that was not sadness exactly. It was the specific emotional release of someone who has been holding a great deal of things together for a very long time and has just been given permission to put them down. "You absolute disaster," Petra said, and then she hugged Amara carefully, mindful of the baby between them, and Amara pressed her face against Petra's shoulder for a moment and said nothing because there was nothing that needed to be said that was not already communicated by the fact of them standing in a waiting room in one piece. Then Petra pulled back and looked at Nora with the expression of a woman who has just been introduced to a person she is going to love immediately and without reservation. "Hello," Petra said, very softly, to the baby. "You caused a lot of trouble." "She didn't cause any of it," Amara said. "No," Petra agreed. "That's true." She looked at Amara. "Are you okay?" "I will be," Amara said. "That's different from okay, but it's accurate." Petra looked past her at Dominic, who was standing near the door with Marcus, both of them engaged in a conversation on their phones that looked operational and probably was. Then she looked back at Amara with the expression she had been using for years when she wanted to ask a question without asking it. "Not yet," Amara said. "I don't know yet. Don't ask me." "I wasn't going to ask," Petra said. "You were absolutely going to ask." "I was going to wait until tomorrow." Amara almost smiled. "Give it a week." The situation with James Hahn resolved itself over the following 11 days in the way that situations involving simultaneous federal pressure and commission disapproval tended to resolve. Not cleanly, not without cost, but definitively. Internal Affairs arrested Garrett on a Thursday morning at O'Hare, where he had been attempting to board a flight to Toronto with a passport that turned out to have been issued through one of Hahn's documentation networks, which was the kind of detail that federal prosecutors found very useful when constructing a cooperation agreement. Garrett cooperated. He cooperated with the specific thoroughness of a man who understands that the volume and quality of his cooperation is the only variable he has any remaining control over, and what he gave federal investigators over the following weeks was enough to dismantle not only his arrangement with Han, but 3 separate cases that had been derailed over the previous 2 years. Han himself was not arrested. This was a fact that sat in Amara's chest with a weight she did not try to minimize or rationalize. He had insulated himself with the layering of a man who had spent 40 years building structures designed to survive exactly this kind of weather, and what the Commission and the federal investigators could reach was the operational infrastructure, Garrett, the documentation network, the financial instruments, without reaching Han himself directly. He remained in his Gold Coast townhouse, and his lawyers filed motions, and the spring wedding was dissolved by mutual agreement of both families in a document that was 3 pages long and said very little about the actual reason. Amara read about it in a news brief on her phone while Nora was asleep against her chest, and the Lincoln Park apartment was quiet, in the particular way of places where someone very new is sleeping. She set the phone down. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about what justice actually meant when it was separated from what you could prove in the sequence available to you, and she thought about a man in a Gold Coast townhouse who had ordered her killed and was currently being represented by 3 lawyers instead of facing consequences. And she sat with the weight of that without trying to make it into something it wasn't. It was what it was. It was incomplete and it was unfair, and it was the structure that existed when you removed from it the parts that could be removed. She was alive. Nora was alive. Petra was alive. Garrett was cooperating. The warrant that would have dismantled everything Dominic built was gone. She did not have Han. She had everything else. For now, everything else was what she had to work with. Vivian left Chicago 16 days after the day at her father's townhouse. She came to the Lincoln Park apartment the afternoon before she left, and she sat across from Amara at the kitchen table, and they drank tea. Both of them, tea, because Amara was nursing, and Vivian said she had stopped drinking anything that required her to think about her father's preferred brands. And they sat together in the quiet of the apartment with Nora asleep in the next room and the Chicago November light coming flat and gray through the east window. "Where?" Amara said. "London, first," Vivian said. "I have a contact at a firm there who has been asking me for 2 years if I wanted to do legitimate work, corporate restructuring. It turns out my particular skill set is portable into legal contexts." She said it with the dry, specific humor of a woman who had been operating at a very high level in a very illegal context for a very long time and had just figured out that the skills themselves were not the problem. "And your father," Amara said. Vivian looked at her tea. "My father will survive this. He'll lose operational capacity, and he'll lose Garrett, and he'll spend the next 2 years in legal proceedings that cost him money and attention and several relationships he valued, but he'll survive it." She paused. "I've made my peace with not being the thing that destroys him. I spent 14 months collecting recordings because I thought that was what I needed to do to be free of it. What I actually needed to do was leave." She looked up. "The recordings were the door. You helped me open it. But what's on the other side is just me deciding to walk through." Amara looked at her. The woman across the table from her was not the woman she had constructed from a press photograph and a news chyron on a Chicago morning a year ago. Not the emblem of everything she was losing, not the face of the arrangement that had dismantled her life. She was a person who had spent 3 years inside a structure she had not chosen, making decisions inside the available space, and had arrived at the only exit she could find and had taken it. Amara understood that. "Take care of yourself," Amara said. Vivian nodded. She looked toward the closed door of the room where Nora was sleeping. "She's going to be remarkable," she said, "given the people she comes from." "Given the people she comes from," Amara said, "she's going to have to be." After Vivian left, Amara sat at the kitchen table for a long time in the quiet. Then she got up and went to the room where Nora was sleeping, and she stood in the doorway and looked at the small shape in the portable crib, the impossibly compact arrangement of a new person, entirely themselves, entirely new. And she stood there until Nora stirred and made the small preliminary sound that preceded real crying, and she picked her up and the crying stopped immediately, replaced by the serious business of nursing, and Amara sat in the chair by the window with her daughter and the gray November Chicago light, and she thought about the scorched corner of the ultrasound photograph that was still in the pocket of her coat on the hook by the door. She thought about what to do with it. She had been carrying it for 5 months, the last evidence of the life she had decided not to tell him about, a piece of burned paper against her sternum, a reminder that she had survived making an impossible choice alone. She had carried it the way you carry a scar, not proudly, not with pain exactly, but with the specific honesty of someone who doesn't want to pretend the damage wasn't there. She thought about that for a while. Then she finished nursing, and she put Nora back in the crib, and she went to the coat by the door, and she took the scorched triangle out of the inner pocket, and she looked at it in the kitchen light. Nothing visible on it anymore, just the gray-black edge of something that had been more than it looked like. She put it in the kitchen drawer, not the trash. She was not going to perform a symbolic gesture she didn't fully mean, but away. In the drawer with the takeout menus and the spare batteries and the other small evidence of a life being assembled in a new place. She would decide later what it meant to keep it. For now, she was just putting it down. Dominic knocked on the apartment door at 7 that evening. He knocked, which he had been doing since she arrived, not using the key code on the lock, not letting himself in, knocking and waiting, which was its own kind of language, and she had been noting it. She opened the door. He was holding a paper bag that smelled like the Thai place 3 blocks east, and his coat had November on it, and he looked the way he had been looking for the past 16 days, like a man who has had everything rearranged and is trying to locate himself inside the new configuration without demanding that anyone help him do it. "I wasn't sure if you'd eaten," he said. "I hadn't," she said. She stepped back from the door. He came in. He set the bag on his kitchen table, and he looked at the closed door of Nora's room, and something moved in his face. The same movement every time, the specific recalibration of a man who has not yet fully integrated the fact of a person he helped to make. "She's asleep," Amara said. "Okay," he said. He sat down at the kitchen table, and he did not open the bag yet, and he looked at Amara with the directness she had always associated with him, but that was carrying something different now. Something less calculated and more exposed. "I want to talk about what happens next," he said. "I know," she said. She sat down across from him. "I've been thinking about it." "What have you been thinking?" She looked at the kitchen table for a moment, then she looked at him. "I'm going back to work," she said. "Not immediately, but I'm going back. There is a painting at the Chicago Institute of Art that has been waiting for a conservator for 8 months, and my former director has called me twice in the last 2 weeks, and I am not going to tell you that I'm not thinking about it, because I am." "Good," he said. She looked at him. "That's it?" "That's it," he said. "I want you to go back to work. I want you to do the thing you're good at. I want—" He stopped. He looked at the table and then back at her. "I want to be someone who wants that. Not someone who says he wants it while quietly engineering circumstances that make it difficult. I want to actually want it." He paused. "I'm aware that wanting to be something is different from being it. I'm aware that I have a significant track record of managing situations toward outcomes I've already decided on. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that's not who I am." "Then what are you going to tell me?" she said. "That I know it," he said. "That I know the difference between who I've been and who I'm trying to become, and that I understand clearly that you knowing the difference too is the only reason we're having this conversation at all, instead of you being in Lisbon with Vivian Hahn's money and a new name." He held her gaze. "I want to be in Nora's life. I want to be there for every decision about her, every school, every doctor, every choice. Not because I have a right to it, because she's mine and I love her already, and I didn't know a person could love something so completely that they'd never met yet. And now I know that." He stopped again. Then he said the harder part. "And I want to figure out what you and I are. Not today. Not this week. I want to know that there is a version of the future in which we figure that out." The kitchen was quiet. Somewhere in the next room, Nora made the small sound she made in her sleep sometimes, a tiny commentary on nothing. And both of them turned instinctively toward the door and then back to each other, and the simultaneity of it said something that neither of them put into words. "I need you to understand something," Amara said, "about what I will and won't do." "Tell me." "I will never again be the person who exists beside your life without being part of the decisions," she said. "Not even a version of that. Not even the beginning of that. I spent 7 months in that position because I told myself it was a choice when it was actually a situation I'd accepted. I'm done accepting situations. She held his gaze. Every decision that affects Nora, every one, happens with me in the room. And if you and I are going to be anything to each other, it happens in the open. No arrangements I don't know about. No structures built around me without my knowledge. No managed situations. Yes, he said. I mean it, Dominic. I know you mean it, he said. I watched you build a case against a man in his own house while you were in labor. I know what you mean when you say a thing. She looked at him for a long moment. She was looking for the calculation, the management, the controlled delivery of a message designed to produce a specific outcome. She had been looking for it for 16 days, every time he knocked on the door, every time he brought food and sat with Nora and left when she asked him to leave without argument or engineering. She was not finding it, which did not mean it wasn't there, somewhere, dormant, the habits of a lifetime waiting for the circumstances that would call them back up. But she also knew something about damaged things. She knew that a painting was not repaired by pretending the damage had not occurred. A painting was repaired by understanding the damage, its nature, its depth, its effect on the surrounding structure, and working patiently and honestly with what remained. You did not restore something by erasing its history. You restored it by making the history legible without letting it be the only thing visible. She thought about this. She thought about the scorched corner of paper in the kitchen drawer and the ultrasound photograph she had burned in a sink and the life she had carried alone across a winter and built from ingredients that were entirely her own. She thought about what it meant to let someone help carry something without surrendering the thing itself. Open the bag, she said. The food's getting cold. Something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly, something quieter than relief. The specific quality of a man who has been holding his breath for a very long time and has just been told he can stop. He opened the bag. He set out the containers between them, and she got 2 forks from the drawer with the takeout menus and the spare batteries and the scorched corner of paper, and she sat back down across from him, and they ate together at the kitchen table in the Lincoln Park apartment, while Nora slept in the next room, and Chicago moved beyond the windows in its enormous, indifferent way. The lake somewhere to the east under a sky that was beginning, finally, to clear. They did not talk about the future that night. They talked about small things. He told her that Marcus had put in for 2 weeks off, which was the first vacation Marcus had taken in 11 years, which he had requested the day after the Garrett arrest, and which Dominic had approved before Marcus finished the sentence. She told him about a fresco she had studied in her second year of conservation training, a 16th century piece in a church in central Italy that had been painted over twice, first by a later artist who found the original too rough, then by a restorer in the 19th century who had been trying to protect it and had instead buried it further under layers of well-intentioned intervention. It had taken a team 8 years to remove both layers and find the original underneath, which turned out to be significantly more beautiful than either version that had covered it, specifically because of its imperfections. The rough brushwork, the places where the artist's hand had wavered, the traces of revision visible in the underpainting. Dominic listened. He listened the way he had listened to her from the beginning, when she had first understood that his attention was real rather than performed, complete, patient, without the background hum of a mind composing its response while the other person was still speaking. The restorers, she said, the ones who did the work. They weren't trying to make it perfect. They were trying to make it honest. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is that what we're doing?" She looked at him. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think we're trying to find out if there's something underneath worth doing the work for." He nodded. He accepted that the way he had been accepting things lately, without trying to resolve it before it was ready to be resolved, without engineering the uncertainty into something more manageable, just holding it as the thing it was. Outside, November did what November in Chicago does. It pressed against the windows and moved through the streets and kept going, indifferent to the particular lives being assembled and repaired inside the buildings it passed. Inside the apartment, the kitchen light was warm and the food was getting cold, and in the next room, a person who was 6 pounds and 4 ounces and 16 days old was sleeping through her first winter in the world with the complete commitment of someone who has not yet learned to do anything halfway. Amara looked at Dominic across the kitchen table, and she thought about who she had been a year ago and who she was now, and the specific cost of the distance between those two people, paid in months of hard, quiet living and one morning of burning what she had loved in a kitchen sink. She thought about what it meant that she was still here, that Nora was here, that the man across the table from her was a different version of himself than the version she had walked away from. Not because circumstances had forced him to perform a different role, but because he had spent 5 months in the experience of loss and had arrived somewhere that looked, from where she was sitting, like the beginning of an honest reckoning. She knew that beginnings were not the same thing as outcomes. She knew that the distance between who a person was trying to be and who they actually were could be longer than it looked from the outside. She knew all of this with the clear-eyed practicality of a woman who had spent 8 years learning to read the difference between a painting that had been beautifully restored and a painting that had been skillfully faked. She also knew that you had to start somewhere. She reached across the kitchen table and she picked up the container of Pad CU and she put more on her plate and she said, "Tell me about Marcus's vacation. Where's he going?" Dominic looked at her. Then he looked at the plate in front of him. "He said he's going to Milwaukee," he said, "to see his sister. She has 3 kids and he hasn't seen them since last Christmas." "Marcus has a sister," Amara said. "He has 2, Dominic said. "He talks about them occasionally, when he thinks I'm not listening." She looked at him. "Do you listen?" "I'm learning to," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, small and deliberate, the nod of a woman who is not giving anything away that isn't being genuinely offered, who is not performing warmth she doesn't have, who is simply acknowledging an accurate and honest statement with the seriousness it deserves. It was not forgiveness. It was not arrival. It was the first careful step of a restoration that would take time and honesty, and the patient daily work of 2 imperfect people who had hurt each other and survived it, and were now trying to determine what the structure looked like when you removed the damage carefully enough to see what had been there before. From the next room, Nora Grace Bennett made a sound. Not the small sleep commentary this time. The preliminary announcement, the sound that meant something was about to be required. Amara was on her feet before it completed itself, moving toward the door with the automatic response of a woman whose body had been recalibrated in 16 days to treat that specific frequency of sound as the most important signal in any room. She pushed open the door. She went to the crib. She picked up her daughter, who stopped complaining the moment she was lifted, and she stood in the small room in the Lincoln Park apartment with Nora against her shoulder, and she looked at the window where the Chicago night was doing what Chicago nights do, pressing dark and cold against the glass. And she felt the weight of the child in her arms and the weight of everything that had produced this moment, and she held both of them, together, without trying to resolve the one into the other. Behind her, in the doorway, Dominic stopped. He did not come fully into the room. He stood at the threshold, learning the new habit of stopping at the threshold and waiting to be invited past it, and he looked at the woman and the child at the window, and his face in the low light of the room was the face she would remember when she thought about this night. Not the face of the man from the press photographs, not the face of the man she had watched on 4 television screens on a cold November morning with an ultrasound photograph in her pocket, but the face of a person confronting something larger than himself and finding, in that confrontation, the beginning of something that might eventually be called humility. "She okay?" he said quietly. "She's fine," Amara said. "She just wanted to make sure we hadn't gone anywhere." She felt rather than saw his smile. Then Nora shifted against her shoulder with the decisive authority of a person who has located what she needs and intends to have it. And Amara turned from the window, and the room held all 3 of them in its small, warm light. And outside Chicago kept going, enormous and ongoing, the way cities do, the way life does, past everything and through everything, and forward into whatever came next.